And I'm going to click live on here
On where?
right now on Zoom.
Okay.
All right. We are officially live. I see people filtering in. It is just before 11 o'clock Eastern time, May 14th, almost summer. Crazy to think about that we are all the way almost through the meteorological spring here, Michael. But
Yeah.
we've got a good forecast for you all today.
Yeah. It is crazy. It's May 14th. We've got 37 inches of rain this morning, and here we are. No, definitely a lot of rain this morning. Where I live in Johnson County, a lot of the growers around me have planted yesterday, and then the fields this morning were. I'm nervous they're going to have to replant. Um,
Yeah, I know that we saw in about an hour here in Johnson County, Indiana, just south of Indianapolis, we had an inch and a half plus of rain in about an hour with
Yeah.
some of the downpours this morning. So it's still raining. And
Yeah.
so certainly it's been a stark divide that we'll talk about as we get into this webinar of areas that have been very dry over the past several weeks and areas like in our neck of the woods that have been consistently active. Even when we have had a couple of days of dry time, then we have a day like this where we get inches of rain. So.
Yep. Yep.
But just to kind of start out, guys, I wanted to be sure to give a shout out to our sponsor for this webinar. They sponsor all of our webinars, Farm Credit Mid America. I think that especially considering some of the issues in terms of planting, potential drought threats ahead, having a source and a supporter like Farm Credit Mid America is really great to have. And so, working with a farmer-owned lender like Farm Credit Mid America, they understand the role that weather plays for all types of operations. And so be sure to learn about more that they can offer at fcma.com. And of course, if you want to learn more about our platform and Clarity platform, we'll talk a little bit about this as we go through the webinar today. You can scan the QR code there in the bottom left or go to bamwx.com to learn more about our services. But with that being said, let's get this show on the roll, Michael.
Yeah.
Show on the
Yep.
road.
Yep. Let's do it.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
oh no, you, please.
Oh, okay. So here's just a quick outline for you all of what we will talk about as we go throughout this webinar. We always do a review of how the forecast has gone in the past. It's critical for you all to have an idea of how we do these forecasts and how they verify. It's not like a day of type of a forecast when we're talking about seasonal outlooks. It's a general idea. And so we'll highlight how things evolved last year and how things have evolved this spring so far. We'll take a look at the next couple of weeks to round out spring and then get into some of the key forecast signals, analog years, model guidance, and then our official outlooks and impacts to be expected as we go throughout summer of 2025. Real quick, Michael, if you want to speak on this, I did want to be sure to make a note of our business platform, our Clarity Business subscription, real quick before we get into the forecast.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, case in point, perfect example today. I mean, I think it's lost on a lot of people how much weather can impact us at the drop of a hat, really, and really alter operations from all different angles. Almost every industry you could think of that relies on outdoor related weather information this morning across the central portion of Indiana probably caught majorly off guard. Several inches of rain, a lot of flooding going on. Um, with our business package, that's not something that happens. We take that away. We were sending updates to clients this morning before 5 o'clock, preparing them for the day, beating the National Weather Service by sometimes 30 minutes on a lot of things. So this is a great way for you to really position your business to manage the weather in a way that can save you a lot of time and money. So check it out.
Yeah, so you can scan that QR code, or if you're watching on a computer, you can type in that link on your phone and learn more about the business platform and do a trial there on
Mhm.
our website. With that being said, let's get into how we did last year. And I
Hmm.
think we talked a little bit about this in our spring webinar, but overall, very happy with how the 2024 forecast evolved. It's never going to be perfect at this distance, but if you look at the fact that, our corn yield forecast, which we base off of weather information that we have and data, was within one. That's very, very good. And same thing with soybeans there. And I think that a couple of key notes, it was the southeastern part of the country, southeastern part of the ag belt that had lower than normal yields, which is where we had some of those dry risk or equal chances and heat potential in there. I also want to be sure to note, Helene and what it did in the Carolinas and in the Mid-Atlantic also had a big impact on this as well. Just not only destroying crops, but destroying communities down there. That had a big impact on how things ended up in the southeastern part of the country as well, which we will talk about hurricane season as we close out this webinar as well and how it may impact things for this upcoming year. But, we're looking at general trends, general ideas at this distance to give you an idea of how to prepare seasons ahead, which is what we'll talk about throughout this video.
Yeah, real quick, Brett, on that previous slide, with the looking at where the yield was impacted the heaviest,
Mhm.
not only did you have Helene that came through and offered up a year's worth of rainfall in a day or two, um, you also had a lot of period where it was very dry before that.
Yep.
Um, Ohio, by the way, South Central Ohio last year had one of the driest summers it's really ever seen. And then the next thing you know, you throw flash flooding on top of it from post-tropical storm systems. So, um, listen, there's a lot of companies that do a lot of yield forecasting. I've watched it for many years, and we continuously beat them every year. And I don't say that to boast or brag. I just say it because it's the truth. Our yield forecasts are based on things that matter. We're not running a bunch of BS algorithm, machine learning stuff here. We're basing it off of research and things that matter. We've done very well with it, and to be within zero point 0.7 points of the yield forecast is that's and not wavering, by the way. We
Mhm.
never jumped on, well, it's going to be 184, 186 now, record crop monster. These people, that happens every year.
Yeah, it's so easy as you go throughout the season and even before the season to change things up a bunch.
Yep.
And data comes in and it changes and this changes and
Mhm.
everything's in flux all of the time. And sometimes it's just better to stay steady as she goes. And sometimes we get flack for that a little bit, right?
Yep.
To not adjust, but I think 9 times out of 10 it normally pans out.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. So on this next slide, we're talking about one of the things last year that was a big deal was the derecho risks that we talked about, and you can see the animation of the July 15th derecho here that brought, gosh, just a number of severe weather reports.
Hmm.
Um, number of wind damage reports. You can see the swath there that went right through Iowa,
Yep.
Illinois, and Indiana, which is the heart of the corn states, the heart of the ag belt in general there. Major hail, major wind, some wind gusts there north of 90 miles per hour, north of 100 miles per hour there in northern Illinois. So just one of the things we talked about last year was the potential for some of those derechos to move through. Brett, can you play that animation again?
Yeah.
It just giving the evolution, the idea of that. Those are just always so impressive to me. It's such a phenomena there of weather. And again, honestly, this year I wouldn't be shocked to see some of that maybe a little further north and east this year. We're going to talk
Hmm.
about that, but was certainly an element to some damaged crops and some high end yield, the top end yield being taken off some of these crops for sure.
Yeah, and we've seen, I feel like more of these lately, Michael, just the past several years. And I think a lot of that is related to what we'll talk about here in a moment. We've had a lot of La Niñas lately. It
Yep.
tends to support these high pressures, these areas of high pressure that develop in the middle of the country, which can lead to some of the drier risks we'll talk about as well. But it can also send those storm clusters out to the east of that high and into the eastern ag belt in the northeastern part of the country. And I think that we'll see more of that as we go throughout the summer, as you alluded to. But let's take a look. Let's get into the forecast a little bit. It's always good to know where we're at right now. We do have drought conditions, and in some cases, severe to extreme drought conditions across parts of Nebraska, South Dakota, western North Dakota right now. We're starting to see some severe drought conditions in Kansas as well, and some of those abnormally dry conditions in parts of Iowa, Illinois, and northwest Indiana. Now, we've seen some improvement the past 4 weeks, but it hasn't been notable. We've seen a little bit of improvement, but it hasn't been widespread. We've had this type of a look with the drought monitor, I would say, for quite some time now in terms of the southwestern U.S. to central and northern plains being under drought conditions. I feel like that map has looked like that for a long time, and you can see that reflected in the rainfall ranks, the precipitation ranks this spring.
Mm.
Generally speaking, the further south and east that you've gone, it's been active, which we talked about. If you were with us for our spring webinar, we talked about plant delays. We talked about wetter risk in the eastern ag belt and further down to the south and to the east, and that's exactly what's happened. But it's been drier than normal across Nebraska, Kansas, parts of the Dakotas as well. And so, generally, that type of a setup has been pretty persistent as we've gone throughout spring. We've had periods. We'll talk about a period where it can be a little bit wetter coming up, but generally speaking, over a 3 month period, it's been dry west and wetter east.
Yeah, I think you can see that month to date with the rainfall in May and just kind of the departure from normal forecast here on your next slide, Brett, where you can see the area that's dry and may continue to run drier. Now, does it mean it won't rain at all? No, it doesn't mean that right now. Um, but I think our concern continues to mount more so June into July.
For sure.
But nonetheless, this is dry for May. I mean, this
Yeah.
May is historically a very wet month, and so it should be wetter than this. So certainly some concern there, and you can see that through the next 20-day forecast just from the latest EPS weekly, taking us out to the end of the month. But certainly the potential for much above normal rain there in the northern
Hmm.
plains that will make up for the deficit and the southern Canadian prairies too. But the rainfall situation in the Tennessee River Valley, there east in the Mid-Atlantic, I mean, um, you know, if anything, it's too much rain. So
Yep.
it's a very interesting pattern nonetheless. But the Dakotas certainly are going to benefit here in the short term from the rain coming.
Which, I think is critical because if that rain hadn't been coming with as dry as it's been the past couple of weeks, and
Hmm.
some of the drought conditions there, probably would be very, very easy to get very hot and very dry very quickly. So that's some critical rain that's happening there as we go over the next 7 days or so. And you can see why. We've got cooler air west, warmer air to the east the next 7 days. We do have a cooler stretch coming and actually some additional frost threats across the northern belt up in the Dakotas and Minnesota that we'll need to keep an eye on, maybe parts of Wisconsin and Michigan as well as we get into next week. But a cooler than normal pattern across much of the ag belt, especially further to the east. So it's not substantially warm yet, but what starts to happen towards the end of this month is this warmth out to the west will start to press further to the east, which will set up our June forecast. Here's a look at rainfall the next 2 weeks. You can see that rain there that we talked about across the Dakota, some very heavy rain. We're talking, 3 to 5 inches of rain in some spots up there and rains into Iowa, into parts of Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois, for some of those areas that have been a little bit drier. But you can go into that week 2 forecast. We're already starting to see drier conditions show back up. And so this is what we've had this spring is we've had stretches where it's gotten active out there and then it just gets dry again. And I think that, it's not even through May, we're not dealing with persistent heavy rains up there. Can there be some beneficial rains? Sure. Will it continue to stay very wet to the south and to the east? Probably. It's probably going to be challenging. to continue to see dry windows if you're in the lower Ohio Valley as we go over the next 2 weeks.
Yep.
Th
One
this is,
thing
yeah, go ahead, Michael.
real quick, Brett, I think to highlight, if you go back there on your map, if you just expand that red circle a little south to the Ohio River, um, is just keep in mind that the potential here for probably an uptick in severe weather the next 2 weeks in this general
Hmm.
region. And a lot of times the modeling will struggle in picking up on the heavier convective nature of the rains. And I wouldn't be shocked in that region Brett just highlighted there in the square that if there isn't some concerns for too much rain in the next couple of weeks, especially even after today across central Indiana. Um, but severe weather chances are higher there, and heavy rainfall, flash flooding chances, in my opinion, are higher there. Just looking at the data,
Yeah, sure.
it's active, and I think late May is there's a lot left on the table for severe weather potential on all fronts there.
Absolutely. So, guys, real quick, we'll go over to the next slide here. Let me turn my annotation off real quick. See if I can get that off the screen. It's fighting me. There we go. All right. So this is a new experimental tool from Sport Liz that actually highlights the soil moisture percentile based off of the forecast. So your left image here is what the current state is. You can see the improvement expected across parts of the Dakotas, but still continuing to look very dry in terms of total soil moisture, 0 to 100 centimeters in southeastern South Dakota, Nebraska, western Iowa, Kansas, and western parts of Missouri. And you can see some of that even still into parts of the Ohio Valley. Some improvement in northern Illinois, northern Indiana, but still leaning a little bit drier than normal. Very wet conditions with the soil moisture in the south and east U.S. and up the east coast. That looks to continue as well. Let's see here. There we go. And then here's a look at that expansion that we talked about in terms of the warmth as we work into the weeks 3 and 4 time frame. Warmer than normal temperatures beginning to build across the central U.S. Still not all that warm. In the eastern ag belt and into the northeastern part of the country, kind of staying cooler and more active there, while it's a little bit drier out in the central and the southwestern plains as we go throughout the end of May and into the start of June. So what we start to see happen into early June is that heat starts to creep in from the west. The drier risks start to creep in from the west, maybe staying a little bit more active north and east. But this will set the stage for what will likely become an increasingly hotter and drier forecast further into June and July, as you alluded to earlier, Michael.
Yep, yep, for sure.
Real quick, we do have as we're really focusing on ag here, I wanted to highlight this as well. We do have a specific package for agriculture. I know there are a lot of you on here that are focused on ag or a farmer or in the agriculture industry. So I did want to be sure to mention for you all that we do have this ag package where we break things down in more detail specifically for you spray forecasts, GDU forecasts. You can track your GDU accumulation by your plant date, observed rainfall, and of course, all the long range analysis that we talk about here on this webinar. And so, would highly encourage you to check it out. It's really the only true immersive and all-in-one ag weather platform. And I can't say enough good things about it and all the hard work that's gone into this particular package.
Yeah, it's what you need if you're in the farming community, the farming industry in general. I mean, it's everything that you need in one spot. And we've designed it that way just by talking to all of those people and all of our customers over the years and trying to make it affordable. If you break that down to what you're paying for the whole year to monitor weather for your operation, it's $57 a month.
Hmm.
And you just get such great information. Even furthermore, it's $1.90 a day. So, we're just trying to make it good information affordable for you so that you can make good decisions on your farm and you know, yeah,
Yeah.
make good decisions. How about that?
How about
Oh,
that?
yeah.
All
Um,
right, guys. Let's get into the forecast. Let's get into the forecast data from a seasonal standpoint here. Michael, is there anything you notice off the bat here in terms of the signal in the Enzo region?
Yeah, I mean La Nina is it's really losing a grip there. For the most part, it's a neutral Enzo and if anything on the cooler side. I also noticed just a very, very cool um, body of water north of the Enzo regions there and off the coast of Mexico. This there, which is we call that our Pacific Meridional Mode, our PMM. Um, the cool neutral Enzo with the cool PMM to me is a drought signal. It's
Hmm.
a signal of a lack of rain as we get into the summertime. Yeah, I know, I understand that it's raining right now in places, and I'm not really talking about right now. I'm talking about down the road. I'm really concerned about that.
Sure.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the overall look there um, really follows a lot of years that present a lot of problems with lack of rainfall.
Yeah.
So 2012 being one of them, it's a pretty darn close look there to the year 2012. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be 2012. That's not the. I'm just saying it looks like that there for sure.
Yeah, and we did some research earlier this year as well. Some of this warmth that has shown up at times just west of South America in what we call the ENSO 1.2 region. It's basically neutral right now, but we've seen periods as winds move across the equator of warmer waters developing here, which has been more common in some of those drier summers. And so, again, as you alluded to, just multiple different signals in here highlighting that potential, Michael. And I think the key is staying generally where we are. Because if you look at drier summers and you look at years that had concerns, typically they weren't years that had a strong La Nina and they weren't years that went into an El Nino. El Ninos certainly typically favor moisture potential. We're definitely not looking to go there. And we're not staying in a La Nina either. We're already past that. And so it's kind of that transition off of a La Nina into a neutral state that tends to support the drier risk. And if you take a look at some of the years that are matching best with the evolution right now, a couple of years that stand out, 2001, 2006, there was some dryness in both of those years. It wasn't to the extent of 2012, but 2012 is also running very, very closely to how our Enzo state has evolved this year. It can't be ignored. 2014 is another one. There are definitely differences in the Pacific Ocean. You didn't have that cold water off the west coast of Mexico in 2014, which is why it's not a great overall analog, but there are some similarities there, which we felt this past winter, one of the coldest winters we've had in a while. And so these are the years to monitor: 01, 06, 12. And if you dive into it a little bit more with some of the warmer waters in the eastern Enzo regions, you add in years like 2021. There was a lot of dryness in the Dakotas in that year. Another year, 2017 had some dryness at times. Wasn't necessarily as persistent as the 2012, but it had it in there. And so you add all these together and you start to get a little bit of a clearer picture. And here's exactly what you were talking about, Michael, the cooler waters in the Pacific, which is certainly a big deal. It's minus 2.7. That's a pretty stout negative PMM right now, which will typically allow less of a moisture transport with the subtropical jet.
Yep. Yeah, and uh, I just would if we're watching for seasonal signals and things to change or evolve, this would be one of the most important spots to watch because
Mhm.
that is where your subtropical jet's going to come from if there's going to be one. And it's already hard enough to get widespread moisture in the summer in setups like this. And then when you really make that body of water cooler there, there's just less convection and rising air to carry moisture into the United States. So, um, for those of you that are watching the weather closely, this is a key spot to watch over the next 30 days or so.
Yeah, for sure. Continuing along here, here's a look at what that means. We'll start looking at what these actually mean in terms of outcome. And specifically here, that's that negative PMM that you talked about. Well, there you go. It favors warmer than normal temperatures for pretty much the entirety of the ag belt into the Canadian prairies, and it favors drier than normal conditions, especially for Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri. Now you can see, as we talked about, a little bit of the storm and the derecho threat. You can see a little bit of this action kind of through here in terms of storm cluster potential, but it's certainly not a widespread soaking rain type of a look with this particular analog. And so, certainly a hotter and a drier overall signal here for the middle of the country with these years. We've had a good amount of it the last couple of years. 2023 was one, 2021 was one, and you had years in like 2012, 2011, memorable years in there in terms of areas that got very hot and dry.
Yep.
Continuing along here, here's a look at those top Enzo matches. And so here's that matched with where we've been with the La Nina this past winter into this neutral state. 21, 17, 12, 11, 08, 06, and 01. What's interesting to me, Michael, is, even if you took 2012 out of this, it wouldn't be as robust. It would still be dry, though.
Yep.
These years blended together are still drier than normal. They're still hotter than normal. This particular one is even a little bit more aggressive. It's even a little bit drier, even a little bit further to the north. But I will note, further down to the south and to the east, and I know we have a lot of people watching in the Ohio Valley, it's not as hot. It's normal to even above normal precipitation. So better if you can get out into the fields and finish planting in terms of growing conditions based off these analogs as we go throughout the season. And then if we take a look at just the overall Pacific Ocean state, again, starting to see a theme here. Warmer for the middle of the country, drier, especially across the central plains down into the southern plains. And again, you can see a little bit of the messy moisture northwest flow storm cluster look across the far northern plains and into parts of the Great Lakes on this analog. And so even if we look at the oceanic analogs, Michael, we're just seeing the same thing
Yeah.
over and over and over
Multiple
on
different
multiple
ways.
different pattern drivers.
Yep. Yep, for sure. And that's the thing I want to, make sure folks are understanding is, we can't speak to the magnitude and the severity and the coverage of the drought. It's not possible to do that. I mean, um, are the cards on the table or the players on the field for a drought this summer? Yes, there are. Can you compare it to years like 2012, 1988, and things like that? No, you can't. There's just not, it's not, there's no way to know that. It
Sure,
would be irresponsible or illogical to say that. Um, so what we're just trying to say is, hey, the players are on the field for problems, for lack of rain and heat. The big thing to watch here this summer, in my opinion, too, is the global wind pattern. And if we get any episodes of a big negative angular momentum, big negative AAM, which we'll talk about daily in our long range videos,
sure,
um, we're gonna see some nasty heat waves, I think, develop from that with the overall general setup here. There could be some really nasty spells of heat, and those are the types of setups where wherever that heat establishes itself, it's north and east of that where those thunderstorm clusters can ride over the top. So if there was a particular spot I target, it would be the far northern grain belt to the far eastern grain belt,
hmm
maybe Indiana, Ohio, down into West Virginia, into the coastal areas there. Um, but that's kind of the thought process. It's one of those summers that has potential to
sure.
to to bring a lot of heat and lack of rain.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, just to give another quick shout out to Farm Credit Mid America, you know, if you're looking at potential drought conditions for your area, reach out to them. Talk to one of their crop insurance agents and learn how you can protect yourself from potential damage from drought risk as we go throughout the summer months. And so they're there to help you. And again, happy to have them on board as a sponsor for this webinar.
Mhm.
With that being said, and those key pattern drivers, I want to go into what I personally think is the most underrated and potentially the biggest signal that we have year over year that isn't talked about a whole lot, and that's this aridity index.
Oh
And if
yeah.
you've watched some of our webinars the past couple years, we lean heavily on this. The idea here is if you combine the standard deviation in high temperature minus the standard deviation in precipitation departure with spring, it gives some indications of areas that have gotten too arid, if you will, too dry in the atmosphere throughout spring, not enough moisture in the time frame where you're supposed to be getting more of a surplus. And if we look at past conditions and we look at years that have been, a little bit more of a surplus or less of a surplus, it can give us indications on where to expect drought conditions to develop and specifically potential yield indications. What we have here on the left, the far left column, I'll circle it with the annotator tool here for a second. If we look at this far left column, this is the aridity index throughout spring for the last 3 years on the top, and then 1988. I wanted to throw a drought year on here just to highlight that. You can see how, to the right, the actual corn yield departure has followed very, very closely the aridity index. Areas that have been green or have had a surplus of moisture in spring tended to have better yields in summer. Areas that have been drier, more arid, brown colors in spring tend to have lower yields as we go into the following season. And you can see that all the way back to 1988. The signal was there for the drought in 1988 through the spring, and the same thing with 2012. 2012 may even be the most extreme example of it. There are some similarities to 2012, I would say, and 2006 in this area, out in parts of the plains. Now, the big difference is the Eastern Belt. The Eastern Belt, there's not that signal right now. Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, really, you're not a bad, it's not a bad signal in here. But this is a pretty strong signal, which would indicate that the highest risk for lower than normal corn yields this upcoming year is in this red area that we have highlighted. And again, you get variances year over year in terms of, maybe it trends a half a state north or south or west or east. It's not going to be perfect. But this should give you a general idea of maybe where the most concern is heading into this upcoming season.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's this method really has yet to fail us.
Yeah.
It's this method works pretty well. In fact, it works so well I kind of don't like sharing it, but it's good for the people to know that it's normally a pretty good indication of what we're going to be dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, let's get on with the rest of the forecast here, guys. Let me see if it'll. There we go. With all that wrapped together, our top five analogs for this summer: 2021, 2012, 2011, 06, and 01. Don't take one particular year verbatim here. It's a blend of them, guys. It's not a remake of 2012. It's not a remake of 2011 or any of these years. But there are elements in all of these years when you combine them together that make it a good overall composite for this summer. And the signal's hot, especially the further west that you go. Maybe not as hot in the eastern belt again. And I think that's an area that at time can see some reprieves. We're seeing some cooler air late May, probably lingering into June further to the east. And the one other note that I'll mention, maybe August into September, we need to keep an eye on things. There are some signals that typhoon season in the West Pacific could be active, which can sometimes lead to sneaky cold fronts, sometimes, in the eastern part of the country, heading into late summer and into fall.
Yep. Yeah, and you know, it's normally when you think about patterns like this, I always try to think about like the logical application um, of when we put a seasonal forecast out and we think about how they normally go in the real world, if that makes sense. And so when I see something like this, I think that there is the potential that there's some garden spots that have
Hmm.
very good crops this year in the East.
Sure.
Um, and I just trying to think again of reality here. The last 5 of the 6 years have produced below trend line yields and droughts in Iowa.
Hmm.
That's just what has happened the last 5 of the 6 years. Um, and the tendency in the recent patterns in climate here has been to make that area drier and hotter. And with the neutral INSO setup and just that going how I think it goes in my head, that scenario probably runs a play again. I don't see a path towards a record yield this year with that, but I do see a path towards if you're in a good spot, you're in a good spot.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. 100%. And I think that it's always worth keeping in mind recent climatology. And that's just what has happened over the past several years. And I think part of that is because we've seen a rather consistent signal in the Pacific Ocean and with these La Nina to neutral Enso states throughout summer. And so, if you've seen some similarities the past several years, we've been leading up to this in terms of having some of these signals at times in different areas over the past several summers. In terms of precip, here's what they look like. And you can see kind of the corridor of maybe the driest signals, guys, through parts of Iowa, the Central Plains, if you will. I think that you can also see here, you can see some of the moisture potential, some of the northwest flow potential in the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, parts of the Ohio Valley in here. I wouldn't be shocked if the northern plains, based off these analogs and based off some of the ones we looked at, this is an area where at times you can have some storm cluster activity. Maybe that have and have nots that we talk about. Someone may cash in on some heavy rain in a storm cluster and others get skipped over multiple times. And there may be a lot of variability in this region to the north.
Hmm. Yep. I don't disagree at all. And case in point right now, I think is just this temporary look into the Dakotas and
Hmm.
southern prairies. It's very wet the next 7 days.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, guys, if you're in Canada, we've signed up to pro ag subscribers from Canada just this morning.
Hmm.
Canadian farmers, we have data and stuff for you. We can help you. So if you're in Canada and you want good weather data, we have it through Clarity, just FYI.
Yeah. And it's something that, the longer range forecast out there is something that we pay attention to pretty closely in the prairies as well. I hop on a podcast once a month with one of our clients. It's the What the Futures podcast. And so we tailor information for everywhere,
Hmm.
including up in Canada. So pretty excited about that.
Yep.
One thing before we get into the official forecast that I do want to mention real quick. The model data, the model data for this summer has been remarkably consistent. I don't remember in 7 or 8 years of doing this, Michael, of the seasonal data being this consistent, which scares me a little, if I'm being honest. But it's been very consistent. It's been hot and it's been dry in the middle of the country all the way back since February for summer.
Yep. I will tell you that Derek, you're welcome. I appreciate that, and thank you for your support. But I will tell you that in 2012, for example, I remember specifically looking at the data out ahead, um, and it it had pretty aggressive, suggestive, drier forecasts for quite a while that many were not anticipating to the level and to the magnitude, obviously, that it happened. But these seasonal models with precipitation tend to do pretty well
Hmm.
with extreme instances, and I think we're kind of seeing that.
Yeah. So that was the multi-model, really all of the different models all rolled into one. Here's the American suite of data. You can see really the same type of a look there. I'll roll through these pretty quick. Here's the CPC IRI, so another multi-model blend here. I mean, it's just the same type of idea over and over. If anything, the only difference is maybe a little bit hotter in the West, the Pacific Northwest and the Southwestern U.S. on these, which I don't disagree with based off where some of those drought conditions are out to the West as well. And so that may be the one difference in the data versus the analogs is the Western third of the country. And it's been hot out there the last several summers. So I don't really see a big reason to disagree with that. And that's what we did. Here's our official summer outlook. So this is the unveiling, if you will, in terms of what we expect for this summer. It's a hot summer for the central U.S. and into the western U.S. Where there's already drought conditions is likely where it will be the hottest. At times, can it be even more extreme? That's possible. It might fluctuate a little bit. It might go north at times, it might come south at times, but generally, the middle of the country is hot. And when you get the ridge to set up in the central to western U.S. to mountain west, it tends to shut off moisture potential for these central plains.
Hmm.
And ultimately, we drew that much below normal precipitation signal right smack dab with where that aridity index would indicate the highest drought threat and the lower yield threat. And that's across Nebraska, Iowa, southern South Dakota, southern Minnesota, and into parts of Kansas and northwest Missouri. Further to the east, the Ohio Valley, and especially Kentucky, Ohio, into the northeast, it's not as hot and it's more active. And so, I think as you mentioned, Michael, it could be pretty decent out there, and that's a big difference versus when we talk about a year like 2012. It was very bad further to the east. We're not forecasting that in the eastern belt this year as things stand.
No, and I'm just looking more into some of these seasonal models real quick
Sure.
that seem to do the best with drought forecasting, um, just based on what I'm seeing. And um, the one that did the best with nailing the 2012 outlook, just for the record, was the GFDL. And
Okay.
that particular run actually pinned the severity of 2012 very well for 3 straight months. I've thrown in the chat here this year's GFDL forecast for June, July, and August. And listen, that's pretty darn close to our outlook. It's almost like it's the outlook.
I promise I didn't even look at
Uh-huh. But that one
it.
did the best in 2012 with the severity and this widespreadness of the drought. And then just looking at it here, I'm a big fan of that particular
Okay.
outcome, forecast right now in terms of how I think it's going to go.
Yeah. And
So
that
that
I
is
think
the
yeah.
just so you know, that's the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory of that's the branch of NOAA there, um, and they really specialize in just identifying predictable patterns for seasonal outlooks. That's what they do. So,
Yeah.
anyways, little
Here's a
tidbit
little
there.
Yeah, no, that's actually fantastic insight. One of the things that we don't do a lot of, we really focus on research and analogs. And so I wait until the end to even really look at data. So it's more of a supplement, it's more of an assistance, if you will, rather than the base of our forecast for those of you
Mhm.
that are new to watching how we do things. Breaking things down in a little bit more detail, here's month by month. June, July, probably the core of this in terms of the heat and the dryness in the middle part of the country. I do think that summer can start out a little bit cooler and a little bit more active east, perhaps. The Ohio Valley into the Tennessee Valley in the Northeast, where I think that we'll need to keep an eye on the increasing storm cluster potential as we get into summer is probably late June and into July, kind of around the base of this ridge. You get storm clusters to dive south into the east. You can see that kind of even continuing a little bit in August. And so these areas, I think, will need to be monitored very, very carefully late June, July, and probably beyond for that derecho threat. In fact, I went through and looked. Typically, those areas average about one a year or so, give or take. And I think the analogs had 2.2 when I averaged it out, so more than double the normal. So it's definitely an elevated signal out there.
Yeah, we've got a question here about
Sure.
the yield forecast. We're about to share that, guys. Our
Yes.
our yield outlook. I think it's coming after this.
Yep, absolutely. Actually, no, hang on, Michael. It's back on this slide right here.
Ooh, we skipped it.
I
There it is.
skipped it.
So
I skipped it. We
our
do have charts later. Yeah.
our forecast right now is a 178.5, which, by the way, would be the largest quote unquote crop, I believe, ever. I believe 178.5 would be the largest crop ever. Because last year we were one. No, I'm sorry.
179 last year, I
Last year I
think.
think we were 179.3, so it could be the second largest crop. Don't quote me on that. I can't remember. Nonetheless, the trend line forecast is 180. The corn trend line would suggest we need to be 183.3. I don't think we're into the 180s this year.
No.
I think 178.5 is us being conservative and trying not to get too in extreme right now. The bean forecast at 51, which is 1.4 points below trend of the beans. So our analogs are a 179.6. So the reason we're kind of weighing a little bit lower than that again is just a lot of what we're seeing and just the seasonal pattern drivers and just the ocean, patterns. Everything that we see just has us concerned that if you're really, really dry in Iowa and Nebraska and southern Minnesota, there's a lot of corn there. There's probably over 2 billion bushels of corn grown there. And so concerns would be that just could still be a good crop, just not record or trend line.
Yeah, and I think maybe the only saving grace is this region as things stand, kind of
Yep.
in here.
Yep.
That's probably why the beans are not quite as notable in terms of the comparison versus trend line as well, I would imagine. But that's probably the only saving grace in terms of the analog forecast right now is in this region. And I think that I even maybe threw 2017 into this,
Mhm.
which was a little bit more active as well, to try to balance a little bit of 2012, which is in there, which was obviously worse in the Eastern Belt.
Mhm.
So. That is our official forecast from a weather standpoint right now, 178.5 for corn. Real quick, we'll breeze through this and then kind of get to the last couple of slides here, guys. Preliminary September. Septembers have been remarkably consistent in terms of the outcomes lately. We'll need to watch for tropical activity along the Gulf Coast. I think that maybe not as much of a track up the Florida coast and the Carolinas this year compared to last year, but I do think there could be some storms that develop in the central Gulf and develop into the deep south. So that will be something we need to monitor as we head into September. But I want to talk about this because we've mentioned it several times throughout this webinar, the severe weather signal. And I think that there's the potential for an above normal derecho threat. I think that threat could be the highest from northern Indiana, Ohio, and into the mid Atlantic. That'll include areas like DC, New Jersey, there, Pittsburgh. And so the analogs support it, and the data supports it. I think that it could be a very busy summer in terms of storm cluster potential in the eastern belt.
Yep, I agree, Brett. Sorry, I was looking at my
You're
mind's
good.
racing right now with the historical stuff I was looking at. But go back to that severe weather forecast real quick. Um, I think too, one thing to keep in mind is we're more so looking at midsummer here. I think that where you're seeing in the central portion of the U.S. um, there can still be our fair share of severe weather risks before summer really gets going.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Want to make sure, and it says on the map late June into July. I just want to make sure everyone understands. We're not saying there won't be severe weather elsewhere, but June, July, August, the biggest threat is certainly going to navigate. I think really, I really like the severe report frequency anomaly map on the right. I think that's really highlighting well historically where MCSs are going to go in summer and how they kind of evolve. Brett, right over Fort Wayne, there's always an MCS or a derecho in Fort Wayne,
Yep.
and it's funny how it highlights that. So,
Chicago to
yeah,
Fort Wayne. Yep.
yeah, yeah. So,
Columbus. Yep. That is that it's a pretty clear signal there. Yeah, there will be some severe weather in the plains the next couple of weeks. And even if you're below normal, you can still have some severe weather. There's still probably you might get a cluster or two even in the drought areas. But it probably just won't be as widespread or nearly as frequent.
yep.
Moving on to hurricane. And so a little bit different of a setup in the Atlantic this year compared to last year. The main development region of where hurricanes typically develop, if you will, down in the southern Atlantic is much cooler this year. Uh, it was very warm last year. And so I think that we could actually have less storms this year, but I still think the warm Gulf signal, and I think that the warm signal out in the middle of the Atlantic, you can still get some strong hurricanes. I would keep an eye on storms developing in the Gulf, out towards Houston, New Orleans, kind of in the central part of the Gulf, and moving northward. You think back to years, was 2017 Harvey, a couple of those types of storms that developed really close to the coast. And Michael, I think. Michael, I think Michael was another one
Uh-huh. Yep. Yep.
that developed kind of close to the coast there. And so I could see it being a year where we have late developing storms in the Gulf rather than through the Caribbean.
Daryl Maple says, with the intended corn planted acreage from the USDA, your yield would be a potential record corn yield. So I am correct with that. I thought I remember hearing that at some of the conferences I've been to. So, again, just on that corn yield forecast, we're just trying to be conservative and not, just hypey and dramatic. Do I think it's a record year for yields? I really don't. I really don't think it can be. It's May, and once June rolls around, we'll fine tune that yield forecast one or two more times, and then we'll probably leave it. I think the overall takeaway right now that we're confident in saying is below trend.
Sure.
But I appreciate that, Daryl, and that insight. I had thought I had heard that. And listen, in the hurricane season analogs, with the 2025 forecast being above normal along the Gulf states, um, Gulf of America states, um, you certainly have the potential to bring some of those up into the Eastern Belt, and those carry heavy rain threats and disease threats and things that again can take off top end numbers. I mean, there is corn grown in a lot of the states. I mean, pretty much every state grows some corn somewhere.
Hmm. Sure.
So, it certainly is something that we'll have to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a look at that chart. So yeah, this one didn't include 2017. So 2017 is kind of that borderline year that might be good. Do you throw it in? Do you not throw it in? In our official outlook, I did, but I did want to show our top five analogs here, which are even a little bit more below trend line. A lot of it again driven because of 2012 there, but 2011 is below as well. '01, '06, and 21 are all kind of right at or only slightly above trend line. So there's not really any indication of any kind of a notable above trend line signal with our top five analogs.
Mhm.
Again, if you factor in 2017, which was a little bit better, it was a little higher. You can see it here. But overall, the signal is rather consistently at or more likely below normal in terms of the corn yield.
Ken said,
And
would you like to address the fact that trend yield is well above record yield? Seems like bad math to me. Um, I mean, I don't disagree.
yeah.
I'm not the USDA and I don't set the trend. And, if we adjusted the trend, we would agree, but we don't, the technical trend line yield is not set by us. It is set by the USDA. But I don't know. I don't disagree. I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look, if we wanted to get very granular with it, you could do just the last 10 years trend line and you'd
yep,
have a different look because look at the last 10 years. I mean,
yep,
maybe it's slightly higher, but it's more like that
yep,
rather than like this. And,
yep,
and so, if you compared it to the trend line of just the past 10 years, yeah, it would be different
yep,
for sure.
yep. Awesome.
And
Yeah,
soybean,
soybeans.
real quick.
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah. These are basically the same type of deal, not as below normal. Again, I think partly because of the Eastern Belt. So near or slightly below normal trend line yield in terms of soybean potential. And that pretty much wraps things up, but we will take some questions. I did want to, for those of you that aren't an ag, that aren't a business or school or an organization, we do offer a home package as well. $99 a year for it includes our long range outlooks, it includes our high res radar and our custom BAM alerts. If you've been seeing some of our posts about that, to get out ahead of any potential impactful weather that hasn't been alerted yet, like we issued this morning, the BAM flood statement or the BAM flash flood warning. And so, again, scan that QR code, head over to our site. Even if you're not in the agriculture community or a business, we do have something for everyone.
Yeah. Yep. So check it out. Sign up. We appreciate that. We'll take a couple questions. We're going to take questions for about 6 minutes and then we'll sign off. So Chad sends in much below normal rainfall in Iowa is how many inches below normal in July? Well, I can tell
That's a good
you.
question.
I can look
Probably
at that
better.
while another question maybe comes in.
Yeah.
Um,
Somebody asked, can you EFDL model? I'll see if I can
just put it up on the screen, maybe.
yeah, I'll see if I can throw it in real quick.
July normal rain across Iowa, 30-year normals, is pretty much about
Whoa.
4 to 5 inches. Oh, hello, look at me. Uh,
Yeah.
and so you would put that in the 1 to 2.5 inch range maybe for rainfall in Iowa for July. Statewide about 4 inch, 1/2 inch average. So I would say you're 2.5 inches below average if that was the much below normal forecast. Jim, Brett is working on sharing the GFDL. Steve says, do you see Omega blocks setting up over the Midwest? Yeah, I think it's possible. I think we've already kind of seen hints at that. So I think that's certainly possible. Chad says, great webinar. Thank you, Chad. Appreciate that. Let's see.
There we go. There's can you see that, Michael?
Yep. Yep. There's the GFDL June, July, August forecast for precipitation. So it's a little more generous into Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. It certainly has um, rainfall east for sure, um, and drier there in the plains and the Canadian prairies. So that's the look officially. And again, that is not far off at all from our forecast for precipitation. Phil says, what is the risk of the heat shifting further east into Indiana? I mean, I guess there's a risk, I guess, but I mean, I don't know, what the level would be of that risk, but it's certainly not off the table. We can't really say for certain. Pete Nessler says overnight lows will be a key metric. Things like 2012. Yeah, for sure. You know, if you get into situations where you're extraordinarily drier, the overnight lows may not be as elevated. Those are normally from elevated humidity and dew point values and lows being in the 70s and stuff. But again, that's hard to predict. It's so hard to predict. You know,
Yeah, and the way it's gone so far this year, we've had a lot of drier intrusion from the southwest because of the drought out there. I don't know if it's as low or as warm of overnight lows compared to a year like I think it was 2010 that was so crazy hot with overnight lows. So I don't know if we're quite as extreme with those, but very hard to tell.
someone said, please show the corn yield graph again. Did you show that?
I did.
Okay. Um, Thank
Uh,
you, Ryan. Thank you, Dwayne. Appreciate that. Andrew says, great webinar. How is support for Pacific Northwest weather, especially for businesses putting up high quality forages I mean, we support everywhere. We would be more
mhm.
than happy to support you. We focus everywhere all the time. There's no limits to what we're focusing on. So thank you, James Bishop, for the compliment. How above average rain is Akron, Ohio? Ohio in July is 4.5 inches. So again, you'd be in July, you'd be 5 or more possibly, if you're looking at from an average standpoint.
See.
1995 is when it crushed Nebraska on overnight lows. Interesting.
Hmm.
Thank you, Phil. Does your platform bring in heat stress on livestock and humans? Yes, it does. We predict feels like and wet bulb global temperature. So we certainly focus on that, Ralph. Great question.
Let's see here. Gulf of water in the Gulf of Alaska cooling. It's already a little cool there. I don't know if it'll cool much more. Definitely does matter. I think that water off the west coast of Mexico is probably a bigger deal right now. But the Gulf of Alaska, yeah, definitely will impact things and probably having a little bit of an impact. Thank you, Steve. Does the higher temps relate to less hail events overall? I wouldn't say so, because when you get actually hot temperatures, you can get stronger updrafts, which can suspend the hail more. And if you have dry air, it can prevent it from melting, even though it's warm. So I would say, in fact, I think 2012 had a lot of large hail events out in the Western Plains. So yeah, the heat it doesn't necessarily prevent the hail threat.
Someone asked, do you see the Gulf of Alaska water continuing to cool? Seems to be a common theme in dry, warm Midwest summers. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know.
It's a little cool right now.
Cooler there. I would have to research that. I mean, if I'm looking at just the GFS in general, there's storm after storm in the Gulf of Alaska, but not necessarily. Again, is there a direct correlation to summers being, warmer or drier because of cooler waters there? I don't know for sure. It's a great question, but I don't know the exact answer to that.
All right. That's all that I see for now. Guys, I really appreciate all of you for hopping on. I appreciate Farm Credit Mid America for sponsoring again between the plant delays and the drought risk. If you need a crop insurance agent that can help you navigate that, Farm Credit Mid America, they're there to help. I would imagine that with the plant delays and the drought potential, they're going to be pretty busy. We want to be sure to give them a shout out and appreciate all of their support like always. So.
Yeah.
Again, scan that QR code in the top left or go to bamwx.com/clarity packages. I'll throw it here in the chat as well. We'd love to have those of you for ag and business sign up for a trial or just go ahead and sign up if you want. And if you are looking for the home package, sign up for that $99 a year for our data, our forecast. We'd
Yep.
love to work with you and be able to help you. Michael, we'll do this again in a couple of months for fall.
Yep. Sounds good. We appreciate you all and look forward to keeping you folks updated and have a great rest of your day.